Everyone tells you to keep your head down, do your job, and trust that hard work will eventually pay off. I did all of that for 6 long years. Until the day my boss, my mentor, my so-called advocate, looked me in the eye and buried the very career she once helped build. Before we dive in, please take a moment to subscribe to Karma Encrypted. It supports stories like mine about resilience, betrayal, and fighting back harder than anyone ever expected. Now, let me tell you what really happened. Her name was Miranda Lane, CEO of Ashmark Consulting, a powerhouse, flawless in the public eye. She wore Armani like armor and weaponized silence in boardrooms full of men. I wanted to be her. For a while, I believed she wanted me to become her too. She recruited me right out of business school. Brielle Maddox, she'd said, reading my resume with barely masked amusement. Top of your class. And you managed a startup while studying full-time. Ambition like that is rare. I thought she meant it as a compliment. She brought me into Ashmark as a strategy analyst. I started small, crunching spreadsheets, sitting in meetings I wasn't invited to just to absorb knowledge. I learned fast, moved faster. By year 2, I was her senior associate. By year 4, she said she was grooming me for VP of Product Development. By year 6, she ruined me. The day it started unraveling was the day I presented Project Phoenix. It was my baby, an internal SaaS tool that automated business diagnostics and predicted organizational risk. Something no one in the mid-cap sector had even imagined yet. I had spent 9 months on the model, 18-hour days perfecting code, interface, even AI logic. I rehearsed the pitch to our executive team until my throat was raw. The room was full, Miranda at the head, flanked by VPs, division leads, a few interns clinging to their lattes. When I finished, the room was silent. And then applause. Except Miranda. She just smiled. That thin, unreadable line of approval she gave when she was already calculating 10 steps ahead. 2 weeks later, she presented Phoenix at the Global Innovation Summit in Berlin. As her concept, my name wasn't on the deck. My research scrubbed. My contribution erased. I sat at my desk watching the live stream as she walked across a massive LED-lit stage, dazzling investors, tech partners, and journalists. And not one word about the person who built it. The next morning, I was demoted. No warning. No explanation. A new role in internal analytics strategy, with a vague mandate and no team. At first, I thought it was a mistake. I asked to meet. She said, "You've become emotionally reactive, Brielle. Not everything is about you. This is about what's best for the company." I left her office in a daze. By that afternoon, I no longer had access to the Phoenix backend. My credentials were revoked. My Slack account locked. My team reassigned. The final blow? An anonymous internal memo circulated, claiming I had disregarded proprietary boundaries and that all contributions to Project Phoenix had been part of Miranda Lane's strategic vision from the start. It was character assassination, subtle, elegant, and lethal. I didn't cry. I sat in my apartment that night, staring at my whiteboard full of innovation diagrams, and I laughed. Not because it was funny, because I realized Miranda didn't demote me because I failed. She did it because I was a threat. I took a month off. Officially, it was personal medical leave. Unofficially, it was the month I decided to destroy everything she built. Not out of spite. Out of necessity. You see, Miranda had stolen my career. But what she didn't realize was that she left the engine with me. I had all the original wireframes, use case models, early Git commits under my name. I didn't violate any NDA. Ashmark never patented Phoenix because she thought no one else could recreate it. That was her first mistake. I called in favors. An old classmate of mine, Sean Diaz, had launched his own venture capital firm out in Austin. He owed me from back when I helped him pitch his second round. He flew in that weekend. "I want to fund you," he said after reviewing my prototype. "But you need a CTO. Someone who's seen war." I knew just the person, Amara Fields. She had built security frameworks for Fortune 500s and was bored out of her mind at her current gig. 2 weeks later, Arc Analytics was born. 3 months later, we had a working beta. 6 months in, we had our first Fortune 100 client. And still, Miranda Lane had no idea what was coming. She was too busy flaunting Project Phoenix like it was the second coming of sliced bread, winning awards, posing on magazine covers, doing TEDx talks about visionary leadership. What she didn't realize was that her version of Phoenix had a fatal flaw. It couldn't scale. Because I never gave her the back-end logic for the adaptive risk learning module. She had stolen the shell. I still held the soul. The first time I saw her again was at the Founders in Tech Gala in Manhattan. ARK Analytics had just raised its Series B at a $190 million valuation. We had contracts with 5 international banks, a healthcare AI provider, and were in talks with the Department of Commerce. I wore red that night. I wanted her to see me from across the room. And she did. Eyes narrowed, lips tight, that same unreadable smile. She approached. "Brielle," she said, lifting her champagne glass. "Impressive. Very impressive." I smiled back. "Thanks. I learned from the best." Her eyes flickered, and I made sure I wouldn't repeat her mistakes. That was the last time we spoke, because what came next would make that little smile of hers disappear forever. They say revenge is best served cold, but I wasn't seeking revenge. I was building a throne. The moment I walked out of that gala, I knew Miranda Lane was paying attention. And I wanted her to, because ARK Analytics wasn't just a startup anymore. It was a threat. One she hadn't anticipated. One she could no longer control. And I had just begun. It's funny what happens when people stop underestimating you. Venture capitalists, board advisors, even senior developers who wouldn't take my calls 6 months earlier were now pitching me their time. I was still only 31. Female. Alone in a field dominated by legacy players and good old boys networks. But with results, credentials, and an IP portfolio that made analysts salivate. I didn't just want ARK Analytics to be profitable. I wanted it to be inevitable. We scaled rapidly. By Q2 of our second year, we had onboard 2 government contracts. The Department of Transportation used our predictive risk model to identify failing bridge infrastructure before it collapsed. We saved lives before they even knew they were in danger. Our clients weren't just customers, they were advocates. No gimmicks, no celebrity partnerships, just precision, trust, and performance. But I had one rule. We would never cut corners to rise faster. I had watched Miranda rise by stepping on people. I would rise by outworking them. Still, I couldn't ignore the whispers. At conferences, I began hearing how Ashmark Consulting was faltering, that their crown jewel, Project Phoenix, was stagnating, that they had promised features to investors that weren't even in development. I knew the truth. She had reached the ceiling of what she stole. And then the press came calling. Forbes, TechCrunch, The Wall Street Journal. They didn't just want to talk about ARK's explosive growth. They wanted to talk about me. About the young female founder, with a chip on her shoulder and a billion-dollar valuation in her sights. I hated that narrative. I wasn't some underdog story wrapped in a tidy box of inspiration. I was the future of enterprise intelligence. And no one was going to forget that. Our CFO, Daniel Cho, was the first to suggest it. "You know what we need to talk about next?" he said, sipping his green tea during our Monday exec call. "IPO." My stomach flipped. "Too soon," I replied instinctively. "We haven't even expanded to Asia yet. But we're liquid. We've got 5 quarters of profit. And public markets are hungry for something real. Especially after the Ashmark collapse." My head snapped up. "What?" He shared his screen. A leaked document from an anonymous insider, possibly a disgruntled engineer, showed that Ashmark had laid off nearly 12% of its staff. Their Phoenix initiative was quietly being repurposed. Miranda Lane had kept the press fooled. But internally, the wheels were coming off. It was tempting to gloat, to dance in the flames of her implosion. But I had bigger plans. "Let's start pre-IPO groundwork," I told Daniel. Quietly. "If we're going to make this move, we'll do it without fanfare. When the moment comes, it will be undeniable." 3 months later, ARK Analytics filed Form S-1 confidentially with the SEC. We were projecting a $1.4 billion valuation. We were pre-cleared for NASDAQ. I had reached a milestone most tech founders dream of their whole lives, and I did it not by copying someone else's playbook, but by burning it and writing my own. I wish I could tell you that's when Miranda called. That she texted, emailed, begged for a meeting, something. She didn't. Instead, she retaliated. An article surfaced. Anonymous sources claimed ARC's early prototypes contained borrowed code from Ashmark's Phoenix project. That I had lifted intellectual property during my time as an employee. It was timed perfectly. 2 weeks before our IPO roadshow. Just enough to rattle investors and make headlines. The article cited no hard evidence, but the implication was enough. Our legal counsel, Marissa D'Angelo, called me within minutes. "I've seen worse," she said, calm as ever. "But we're going to need to respond, publicly and fast. I suggest you address this head-on." I knew exactly who was behind it, and I knew what I had to do. I scheduled an exclusive interview with Forbes. I sat down in their downtown studio in a white suit, no jewelry, no distractions. I told them everything. Not just about the accusation, but about the origin of Phoenix, my erasure, the demotion, the retaliation. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I delivered it like a business briefing. And it worked. The clip went viral. But not because it was dramatic. Because it was honest. "I didn't steal anything," I said, looking straight at the camera. "I built the foundation. And then I built something better." 2 days later, Ashmark's legal department issued a vague statement distancing themselves from the article's claims. Too little, too late. The damage was theirs, not mine. The morning ARC went public, I rang the NASDAQ bell, with my team beside me. The valuation closed at $1.8 billion. And in that moment, I didn't think of Miranda Lane. I thought of my younger self, the analyst who once believed loyalty would protect her. And I smiled, because I had learned the truth. Sometimes you have to stop asking for a seat at the table and build a whole damn table of your own. The NASDAQ bell echoed in my ears like the final beat of a war drum. I'd made it. Not just to the IPO. Not just to the billion-dollar mark. I had turned the company that once erased me into dust and built an empire from its ashes. But success, I learned, is not an end. It's a beginning. The morning after our IPO, I woke to an email. Subject: "Let's talk." From Miranda Lane. I stared at it longer than I should have. The last time I saw that name, it was splashed across tech headlines in a scandal tied to falsified data projections and employee disputes. I didn't open it. Instead, I forwarded it to my lawyer. ARC Analytics was everywhere. Forbes 30 under 30. Time's most influential in tech. CNBC called us the next frontier of predictive risk. We'd barely caught our breath from the IPO before we were fielding acquisition interest. Salesforce, Oracle, even Microsoft sent feelers. But I wasn't selling. We weren't just a product. We were an ecosystem, one I was still scaling. Then came the twist. Daniel, our CFO, stepped into my office looking like he'd aged a year and a day. "You need to see this," he said, sliding his tablet onto my desk. Ashmark Consulting. Bankruptcy. Chapter 11. Filed that morning. Miranda Lane was stepping down as CEO, effective immediately, citing personal health and family concerns. But that wasn't the truth. The truth? Her empire had finally crumbled. Our legal team confirmed what I suspected. The anonymous leak months ago? That wasn't Ashmark's only hemorrhage. Clients had left. Investors had pulled. The AI framework of Phoenix had been flagged for bias and failure to meet audit standards. The product Miranda had paraded around the world? It had collapsed under the weight of its stolen foundation. And now, for the first time in a decade, Ashmark's name was up for auction. Daniel said it casually. "We could buy it." I laughed. He didn't. "No, seriously," he insisted. "We acquire the Ashmark name. The IP, the client's still attached. We turn their legacy into a footnote under ours." I should have said no, but there was something poetic about it. The company that tried to erase me would become a line item in the quarterly statement of the woman they underestimated. 2 weeks later, the deal closed. For a fraction of what Ashmark was once worth. And just like that, ARC Analytics became the legal successor to Ashmark Consulting. It made headlines. But I didn't make a statement. I didn't gloat. I didn't tweet. I didn't post a single photo in celebration. Because I had nothing left to prove. What I did do was walk through the now-empty glass tower that once housed their corporate HQ. Dust on desks. Stray coffee mugs. A few printed performance charts curling on forgotten corkboards. And on Miranda's old desk, a framed quote still stood. Leadership is not about power. It's about legacy. I almost left it there. But something made me turn it face down. 1 month later, ARC hosted its first post-acquisition summit. We invited our clients, government partners, advisors, even former Ashmark staff who chose to join our team rather than jump ship. At the end of the presentation, someone raised their hand. Brielle, the man said. You've achieved more in 3 years than most leaders do in 30. What's next? I paused. Because for the first time in my adult life, I didn't have an immediate answer. No new fire to put out. No stolen project to defend. No boss to prove wrong. Just a platform. And a blank page. Later that evening, I found myself staring at a whiteboard in my new office. It was clean. Too clean. No post-its. No blueprints. No algorithms scribbled in haste. Just space. Amara, my CTO, popped her head in. You okay? Yeah, I said slowly. I'm just not used to breathing room. She smiled. Then maybe it's time to do something radical. I raised an eyebrow. Rest. I didn't take a vacation. Not yet. But I did take mornings. Sunlight. Coffee on my balcony. No Slack, no spreadsheets, no chaos. Just the quiet reminder that I had made it through. Through betrayal. Through sabotage. Through public scrutiny and private collapse. And I was still standing. One last thing. The email from Miranda? I finally read it. It wasn't long. Just 4 lines. Congratulations. You were always going to win, weren't you? I made mistakes. I hope you build something better. There was no apology. No excuse. But in her own way, I think that was all she could give. And it was enough. They say peace comes after the storm. But in my world, peace is earned. And maintained. After acquiring Ashmark, we didn't just inherit their failures. We inherited their infrastructure, their half-finished client rollouts, and a morale problem that ran deeper than any balance sheet. But I wasn't here to clean up Miranda Lane's mess. I was here to make sure no one ever underestimated women like me again. My first priority was a complete rebrand. Ashmark had always presented itself with stiff suits, grayscale color schemes, and cold, clinical messaging. The antithesis of everything ARC stood for. We redesigned everything. From logos to workflows, client onboarding to user experience, we made the company human. We made it bold, accessible, precise, honest. I called the initiative the New Code, not just for our software, but for how we led. We expanded our hiring pool. I personally authorized partnerships with HBCUs, women in tech accelerators, and returning veteran employment programs. I wasn't just hiring the top 1% from Ivy League schools. I was hiring innovators who lived problems and designed solutions with real-world vision. Because disruption isn't born in comfort. It's born in hunger. One of our first hires under the new code was Lila Monroe, a single mom of 2, who had previously been rejected by Ashmark because she didn't have a master's degree. She designed a geospatial model within 4 months of joining ARC that NASA later licensed for early wildfire detection. That's what happens when you invest in people who've been ignored. But with growth came new challenges. Shareholders wanted to know, what's next? Where do we go from here? To them, I gave the simplest answer I could muster. Global. We opened offices in Singapore, Berlin, and Nairobi. Not to scale, but to listen. Our product team learned more from one community forum in Lagos than from 3 years of whiteboard sessions in Silicon Valley. Of course, not everyone was thrilled about the way we were running things. I received emails from concerned advisors telling me that our hiring philosophy was too experimental, that our social reinvestment was off mission. They were subtle with their words, but I could hear the echo behind them. You're not running this like a man would. And they were right. I wasn't. Because I wasn't trying to build another tech dynasty that burned out employees and patted itself on the back for DEI statements with no action. I was building something better. One afternoon, at our all-hands retreat in Sedona, I sat beside our youngest engineer, Miriam. She was 23, fresh out of university, and so nervous to speak to me, she nearly spilled her lemonade. I just wanted to say, she fumbled, "You're the reason I majored in AI. I saw your Forbes speech when I was in high school. You made it feel possible." I blinked. That speech was 3 years ago. I had been shaking inside when I gave it. And now here was someone living out her career because of it. It hit me then. I wasn't the underdog anymore. I was the example. That terrified me more than anything Miranda Lane had ever done. Still, imposter syndrome is a persistent ghost. Late at night, when the office emptied and the skyline glowed, I'd look over our quarterly numbers and wonder, is this real? Is this sustainable? Am I really the one to lead this? But the answer always came the same way, not in headlines, not in IPO numbers, not in praise. It came in the grind. The teams who stayed late debugging ethical frameworks. The clients who trusted us with mission-critical systems. The interns who pitched ideas that stunned senior devs into silence. This wasn't luck. It was labor.
It was leadership.
And leadership, I learned, doesn't mean being right all the time. It means being responsible for the tone you set, the risks you take, the mistakes you own, and the future you help build. I ended that year not with fireworks or media interviews, but with a simple walk through our Atlanta HQ, wearing jeans and a sweatshirt, high-fiving employees, and laughing over late-night Thai food with my executive team. No champagne. No speeches.
Just people.
Building. I never thought I'd be walking into the Capitol building because of an AI system I designed on a couch with a second-hand laptop and a cup of instant coffee. But that's where I found myself, invited to testify before Congress. They wanted to understand how ARC's predictive ethics engine had successfully avoided the data breaches and bias lawsuits plaguing other tech giants. It wasn't flattery.
It was scrutiny.
But I welcomed it. Government interest wasn't new. Ever since ARC outperformed Ashmark's old fraud detection models by 43%, agencies from multiple sectors had come calling. Transportation, defense, even education. But this was different. Now we were being asked to help draft federal guidelines on AI integrity, to help shape how the future thinks. I spent the night before the hearing revisiting everything we'd built. And more importantly, everything we refused to compromise on. I open my testimony with this line. Technology isn't neutral. It inherits the bias, the ambition, and the courage of the people who build it. A few eyebrows rose, but others nodded. I walked them through our development process, how we used inclusive datasets, how our models required explainability, how we had a standing protocol to delete any project that could not meet our internal bias audits. It wasn't perfect, but it was principled. And when I finished, one congresswoman leaned in and whispered, "Thank you for not just chasing profit." That moment would change everything. Within a month, ARC was approached by an international coalition tasked with building an AI framework for post-disaster response, earthquakes, pandemics, wildfires. We weren't just becoming profitable. We were becoming essential. And that's when the shark circled. One morning, Daniel handed me a letter from a private equity firm known for hostile takeovers.
They wanted to invest.
Their terms included restructuring leadership, streamlining our innovation labs, and licensing parts of our core tech. Translation? Sell your soul. Smile while doing it. I laughed. Then I politely declined with a 3-word response. We're not interested. They didn't back down. The next few weeks were filled with attempts to pressure smaller shareholders. Whispers about a potential board vote to push me out if I didn't play along. I'd seen this tactic before. Miranda Lane used to call it cornering the checkmate. But I wasn't her. And this wasn't Ashmark. Instead of retreating, I went public. Not in the press, but with our employees. I stood on the top floor of our headquarters, no stage, no mic, and told them exactly what was happening. If they want ARC, I said, they'll have to tear it out of the hands of the people who built it. Applause erupted, not because I gave a speech, but because they knew I meant it. I called a special shareholders meeting. I presented not just our next product roadmap, but the human impact of everything we'd done: disaster zones stabilized, fraud detected, lives protected. Then I announced a bold new policy. Every full-time ARC employee would now receive equity. From janitorial staff to junior devs, we became a worker-empowered company overnight. And with that single move, the private equity firm lost their grip. They didn't own us anymore.
We owned ourselves.
In the weeks that followed, ARC's story made headlines again. But this time, it wasn't about me. It was about a company that believed talent was everywhere, that refused to trade innovation for compliance, that treated its people like legacy, not liabilities. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself a moment of pride. Not because I won, but because I had built something worth defending. One evening, after the storm had passed, I returned to the same rooftop where I once stared at the stars wondering if I'd ever get my life back. I was older now, maybe not wiser, but certainly less afraid. Daniel joined me. "You think we'll ever be done fighting?" he asked. I thought for a second.
No.
"But maybe we'll get better at choosing the battles that matter." He nodded. We stood there, quiet. Beneath us, the ARC building glowed with a quiet hum of hundreds of people working late, not out of obligation, but out of ownership. And for the first time, I realized this wasn't just my revenge story. This was a revolution. The ringing of the NASDAQ bell was nothing like I imagined. There were no fireworks, no overwhelming applause, just a deep, echoing clang that rolled through my chest like a final note in a symphony I'd been composing for years. We were public. ARC was now a publicly traded company, valued at over $1.6 billion before the first bell even finished echoing. The same company Miranda Lane had tried to bury. The one she once called naive, chaotic, unsellable. And I had let it there. But I didn't feel victorious. I felt still, like a mountain watching the storm clear. I stood at the podium with Daniel and 6 employees from 6 different departments, representing the soul of ARC. No PR spin, no hired models, just the people who built this. My hand shook slightly as I pressed the ceremonial button. I wasn't nervous. I was remembering the cold conference room where Miranda told me I was too emotional to be a leader. The day she reassigned my code to a junior just to teach me a lesson. The day she set me a legal threat when I dared to launch my own product. None of that mattered anymore. Because this moment was the answer to all of it. In the hours that followed, the headlines lit up. Tech disruptor ARC surges after IPO debut. Brielle Maddox breaks the mold, sets record for youngest woman to take a company public. But the only message I cared about came in a plain email. No subject. No name. Just, I was wrong. But I still won't apologize. You'll understand someday. Miranda. Even in defeat, she couldn't give credit. I read it once. Deleted it. That chapter was done. Instead, I poured myself into what came next. ARC wasn't a startup anymore. We were a global institution now, with governance boards, investor reports, and media obligations. But I didn't want to lose what made us special. So, I created the Founders Firewall, a policy that guaranteed creative freedom and ethical standards would never be overridden by profit. It meant we'd walk away from bad deals. It meant rejecting government contracts that violated our values. It meant explaining to investors why we wouldn't track user behavior to boost ad revenue. And it meant I had to fight again, but not against Miranda. Against temptation. Because now the world was listening. Tech giants offered buyouts. Media outlets offered book deals. Even a Hollywood studio wanted to option my life story. I said no. Because this story didn't belong to just me. It belonged to every intern who stayed up coding through the night. To the whistleblowers who lost jobs speaking truth. To every woman who heard, "You're not ready," and built the door instead of waiting for it. One night, After a long board meeting, I sat in the server room alone. Not because I had to, but because that's where ARC began. With 3 dusty processors and 1 stubborn dream. I ran my fingers along the racks. The hum of the machines was oddly soothing. And I whispered to the silence, "You are worth it." Weeks later, I visited my old neighborhood. Nothing had changed. Same cracked sidewalks. Same corner store. Same bus stop where I used to sketch code on receipt paper. I walked into Miss Carla's hair salon, the same one where she let me use her Wi-Fi after hours. She looked up from her chair and said, "You still owe me for those snacks you ate in 2017. We both laughed. Then she showed me the article she'd laminated and pinned to her mirror. Local girl turns global CEO. I wanted to cry, but I didn't. I just hugged her tight. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't revenge anymore. It was restoration. At our first shareholders meeting, someone asked what was next for ARC. I smiled and said, "We're not chasing the next big thing. We're building the next right thing." The room went silent. Not because they disagreed, but because, for once, they believed me. I've since stepped down as CEO. Not because I'm tired, but because I believe in succession. Leadership isn't about holding power. It's about passing it on with integrity. I now serve as executive chair, guiding the vision, mentoring young leaders, and protecting what we built. The new CEO? Lila Monroe, the same woman Ashmark once rejected for lacking a degree. Poetic? Maybe. But mostly just. Looking back, I don't think Miranda ever imagined she was sharpening the blade that would cut her out of the legacy. But she did. And that's what makes the story real. So to anyone who's ever been underestimated, overlooked, or pushed aside, let them laugh. Let them doubt. Let them watch. Then rise.
Build.
Own it. Because one day, you'll ring a bell loud enough to echo through the same halls where they once silenced you. And you won't need to say a thing. Because the sound will speak for itself.